The notification arrived at exactly 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, lighting up the cracked screen of Maya Chen's ancient tablet with a soft blue glow. She was already awake, of course, hunched over her tiny desk in the corner of her family's one-room apartment in the outer districts of New Shanghai. Her younger brother slept soundly on the mattress they shared, his breathing soft and regular, while their grandmother snored gently from her cot near the window. Maya had learned long ago to work in darkness, her eyes adjusted to the dim light of her tablet screen, her fingers moving silently across the worn keyboard she had salvaged from an electronics dump 3 years ago. She almost didn't notice the notification at first. Her attention was focused on the complex algorithm she was building, a piece of code that could potentially revolutionize water filtration systems in the outer districts where clean water was a luxury few could afford. The project had consumed her for months, every spare moment between her shifts at the recycling plant and her responsibilities caring for her grandmother going into this work. She had taught herself everything she knew about programming, networking, and systems architecture from discarded textbooks, broken data chips, and the occasional connection to the public information network when she could afford the credits. But the notification persisted, blinking insistently in the corner of her screen until Maya finally sighed and tapped it open. The message that appeared made her heart stop. The header bore the official seal of the Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences, the most prestigious educational institution in the entire human federation. Located on the terraformed moon of Europa, the academy was where the children of senators, corporate executives, and military commanders went to become the leaders of tomorrow. It was a place Maya had read about in stolen moments, a dream so far removed from her reality that she had never dared to hope she might one day set foot within its gleaming halls. The message was brief and formal. It congratulated her on her acceptance into the Academy's incoming class, informed her that her full scholarship had been approved, and instructed her to report to the New Shanghai Transport Hub in exactly 72 hours for departure. Maya read the message 3 times, her hands trembling so badly that she nearly dropped the tablet. There had to be a mistake. She had never applied to the Galactic Academy. She didn't even know how to apply, and even if she had, there was no way someone from the outer districts would ever be considered for admission. The Academy had strict requirements, including genetic screening, psychological evaluation, recommendation letters from at least 3 distinguished members of the scientific community, and an entrance examination that cost more credits than Maya's entire family earned in a year. She should have deleted the message. She should have recognized it for the error it obviously was and moved on with her life. But something made her hesitate. Maybe it was the desperation that had been building inside her for years, the knowledge that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how brilliant her ideas, she would never escape the poverty of the outer districts through legitimate means. Maybe it was the thought of her grandmother's worsening cough, the medicine they couldn't afford, the specialists who refused to see patients without proper insurance. Or maybe it was simply the wild, impossible hope that had kept her going through all the long nights of study and work, the belief that somewhere out there was a place for someone like her. Maya saved the message to her personal files and spent the next 6 hours researching everything she could find about the Galactic Academy and its admission process. By the time the sun began to rise over the smog-choked skyline of the outer districts, she had confirmed her suspicions. The acceptance letter was real, sent from the Academy's official servers, signed by the Dean of Admissions herself, but it wasn't meant for her. Through a series of fortunate errors, including a corrupted database file, a lazy administrator who had failed to double-check the recipient list, and a nomming convention that had placed Maya's tablet identification number 1 digit away from that of the intended recipient, the letter had landed in her inbox instead of its rightful destination. The intended recipient was a girl named Myra Cheng, the daughter of one of the most powerful corporate executives in the Federation. Myra had all the right credentials, all the right connections, and all the money in the world to ensure her place at the Academy. She probably wouldn't even notice the acceptance letter was missing, assuming the error would be caught and corrected long before departure day. But Maya knew something that the administrators didn't. She had spent years building backdoors into the Federation's communication networks, not for malicious purposes, but simply to access information that was denied to people of her class. And through those backdoors, she had discovered that Myra Cheng had withdrawn her application 2 weeks ago, having decided to attend a different institution closer to her family's corporate headquarters on Mars. The acceptance letter was now orphaned, attached to an identity file that no longer existed in the academy system. And Maya, in a moment of reckless courage that would change the course of her life forever, made a decision that she knew could result in imprisonment, exile, or worse. She began to hack. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with a precision born of years of practice. She navigated through firewall after firewall, each one more sophisticated than the last, leaving no trace of her passage. She found the Academy's admission database and located the file attached to her acceptance letter. With a few careful keystrokes, she deleted Myra Cheng's information and replaced it with her own. Name, Maya Chen. Origin, New Shanghai Outer Districts. Genetic profile, unknown. Family status, orphan, raised by grandmother. She paused at that last entry, her finger hovering over the confirmation key. This was the point of no return. If she completed this action, she would be committing identity fraud, academic fraud, and unauthorized access to Federation systems, crimes that carried sentences of up to 20 years in the labor colonies. But if she didn't, she would spend the rest of her life in the outer districts, watching her grandmother die slowly from lack of proper medical care, watching her brother grow up with no hope of a better future, watching her own brilliant mind waste away in the recycling plants and water treatment facilities that were the only employment available to people like her. Maya pressed the key, the file updated, and just like that, she became a student of the Galactic Academy of Advanced Sciences. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of preparation and deception. Maya told her grandmother that she had won a scholarship to a technical school in the central districts, a lie that was believable enough to be accepted without too many questions. She sold her salvaged electronics for what little credit they would bring, using the money to buy her grandmother 3 months' worth of medicine, and to arrange for a neighbor to check in on her and her brother while she was gone. She packed a single bag with the few possessions she owned: 2 changes of clothes, her tablet, a photograph of her parents that had been taken before the factory explosion that killed them when she was 7, and a small notebook filled with her most promising ideas and inventions. The transport hub was chaos on departure day, filled with wealthy families saying tearful goodbyes to their children, personal servants loading mountains of luggage onto private shuttles, and academy representatives in crisp blue uniforms checking credentials and directing students to their assigned departure gates. Maya stood in the corner, clutching her single bag, trying to look like she belonged. Her clothes were clean but obviously second-hand. Her hair was cut short because she couldn't afford maintenance on longer styles, and her shoes had been repaired so many times that they were more patch than original material. She had never felt more out of place in her entire life. The credential check was the moment of truth. Maya approached the scanning station with her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone around her could hear it. The Academy representative barely glanced at her as she held out her tablet for identification verification. The scanner beeped. The representative frowned and looked at his screen more closely. Maya felt her stomach drop. This was it. She had been caught. The security officers would be called, and she would be dragged away in restraints while everyone watched. Her grandmother would be devastated. Her brother would be left alone. But then the representative's frown smoothed into an expression of professional neutrality. He handed back her tablet and gestured toward the departure gate. "Scholarship student, Gate 7, have a pleasant journey." Maya didn't trust herself to speak. She nodded once and walked away, forcing herself not to run, not to look back, not to do anything that might draw attention. She didn't breathe properly until she was seated on the shuttle, strapped into a window seat in the scholarship section, watching the outer districts shrink to a gray smudge on the horizon as the ship climbed toward the stars. The journey to Europa took 3 days. Maya spent most of that time in her cabin, studying everything she could find about the Academy in the ship's public database. She learned about the curriculum, which covered advanced physics, quantum mechanics, xenobiology, artificial intelligence, political science, and a dozen other subjects she had only ever dreamed of studying. She learned about the social hierarchy, dominated by the children of the Federation's most powerful families, who treated the Academy as their birthright rather than a privilege. And she learned about the scholarship students, the rare few who were admitted based on merit rather than money, who were expected to excel academically while navigating a social environment that was openly hostile to their presence. The Academy itself was nothing like Maya had imagined. It was bigger, grander, more overwhelming in every way. The main campus was a city unto itself, built inside a massive dome on Europa's frozen surface, with gleaming towers of glass and metal rising toward an artificial sky that simulated Earth's weather patterns. There were parks and lakes and gardens filled with plants from every colonized world in the Federation. There were research laboratories equipped with technology that Maya had only read about in theoretical papers. There were libraries containing the accumulated knowledge of humanity's thousand-year expansion across the galaxy. And there were students, thousands of them, all dressed in the Academy's signature blue uniforms, all moving with the confidence of people who had never known want or hardship or struggle. Maya's dormitory assignment was in the scholarship wing, a modest building on the far edge of campus that was deliberately separated from the luxury accommodations enjoyed by the paying students. Her room was small but clean, with a bed, a desk, a closet, and a window that looked out over the dome's edge to the icy wastes of Europa beyond. It was nicer than any room Maya had ever had in her life, and she stood in the doorway for a long moment, trying to convince herself that this was real, that she was really here, that she hadn't made the biggest mistake of her existence. Her roommate arrived an hour later. Zara Okonkwo was tall and dark-skinned, with close-cropped hair and eyes that seemed to see right through people. She was from the agricultural colonies of Ceres, she explained as she unpacked her single bag of belongings, the daughter of water farmers who had scraped together every credit they had to apply for the scholarship examination. She had scored in the top percentile, earning her place at the academy through raw intelligence and determination. Maya liked her immediately, recognizing in Zara the same fierce hunger that drove her own ambitions. They spent their first night talking, sharing stories of their home worlds and their dreams for the future. Maya was careful about the details she revealed, constructing a backstory that was close enough to the truth to be believable but different enough to hide the fraud she had committed. She was an orphan, she said, which was true. She had been raised by her grandmother, which was also true. She had taught herself everything she knew, which was the truest thing of all. Zara listened and nodded and shared her own struggles, and by the time they fell asleep, Maya felt like she had found the first real friend she had ever had. Classes began the next morning. Maya had thought she was prepared, having studied intensively during the journey to Europa, but she realized within the first hour that she had underestimated the challenge by an enormous margin. The other students had been preparing for the academy their entire lives, with private tutors, exclusive prep schools, and access to educational resources that Maya hadn't known existed. They moved through the material with an ease that bordered on boredom, while Maya struggled to keep up, scribbling notes furiously, asking questions that drew condescending looks from her classmates, and staying up late every night to review what she had learned. The professors noticed her struggles, of course. Some of them were sympathetic, offering extra help and additional resources. Others were less kind, clearly viewing her as a waste of academy resources, a charity case who would inevitably fail and be sent back to whatever backwater she had crawled out of. But there was one professor who took a particular interest in Maya's progress, and his attention would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. Professor Alexander Vance taught advanced systems architecture, the class that Maya had been most excited about when she had first reviewed the academy's curriculum. He was young for a professor, barely 40, with sharp features and silver-gray hair that he wore pulled back in a neat ponytail. He had a reputation for brilliance that bordered on genius, having designed several of the Federation's most critical infrastructure systems, before retiring from industry to teach the next generation of innovators. He called Maya into his office after her third week of classes. She went with her heart in her throat, certain that he had somehow discovered her fraud and was about to expose her. But instead of accusation, he offered her a seat and a cup of tea and a series of questions about her background that seemed designed to probe the depths of her knowledge rather than the legitimacy of her credentials. He asked about her self-taught programming skills, about the water filtration algorithm she had been working on before leaving New Shanghai, about the back doors she had built into various networks over the years. Maya answered carefully, revealing some things and hiding others, watching his face for any sign of suspicion. But Professor Vance didn't seem suspicious. He seemed intrigued. By the end of their conversation, he had offered her a position as his research assistant, a rare honor for a first-year student and one that would give her access to resources and opportunities far beyond what was available to her peers. Maya accepted without hesitation, recognizing the offer for what it was, a lifeline that could help her survive the academy's brutal academic environment. What she didn't realize was that Professor Vance had his own agenda. one that had nothing to do with nurturing young talent and everything to do with a secret that could shake the foundation of the entire Federation. The weeks that followed were the most challenging of Maya's life. She threw herself into her studies with a desperation that surprised even Zara, who had thought herself the most driven person she knew. She arrived at her classes before sunrise and stayed in the library until well after midnight. She completed every assignment twice, once to get it right and once to get it perfect. She asked questions in every lecture, not caring any more about the condescending looks from her classmates, determined to squeeze every drop of knowledge from the opportunity she had stolen. Her work with Professor Vance was different. In his private laboratory, away from the eyes of other students and faculty, Maya was free to explore ideas that went far beyond the Academy's standard curriculum. Vance challenged her to think in ways she had never thought before, to question assumptions she hadn't even known she was making, to push the boundaries of what she believed was possible. He introduced her to concepts from the bleeding edge of systems architecture, including quantum networking, distributed consciousness, and the theoretical framework for artificial intelligence that could truly think and feel and create. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to trust her with fragments of the truth. The Federation's communication networks, Vance explained one evening as they worked late in his lab, were far more complex than the general public understood. They weren't just pipelines for information. They were the nervous system of human civilization, connecting billions of people across dozens of worlds, enabling the coordination and cooperation that made interstellar society possible. And like any nervous system, they had vulnerabilities that most people didn't know about and weren't supposed to know about. Vance had spent decades identifying those vulnerabilities, cataloging them, and developing theoretical solutions that could strengthen the networks against attack or manipulation. But his work had attracted the attention of powerful interests, people who preferred the vulnerabilities to remain unknown because they were using them for their own purposes. He had been pushed out of the industry, his research suppressed, his reputation quietly destroyed among the circles that mattered. The Academy had been his refuge, a place where he could continue his work in secret, waiting for the right opportunity to reveal what he had discovered. Maya listened to all of this with growing unease. She had committed fraud to get into the Academy, but that was a far cry from whatever conspiracy Vance was describing. She wasn't sure she wanted to be involved in something that could make powerful enemies, especially when she was already living a lie that could destroy her at any moment. But she also couldn't deny the pull of Vance's ideas, the tantalizing glimpse of a truth that could change everything she thought she knew about the world. And then, on a night that Maya would remember for the rest of her life, everything changed. She was working alone in Vance's lab, running simulations on a new security protocol he had asked her to develop, when she accidentally accessed a file she wasn't supposed to see. It was hidden deep in the lab's private server, protected by encryption that should have been unbreakable, but Maya's years of building backdoors had given her instincts that she couldn't always control. She saw the encrypted file, recognized the pattern of the protection, and cracked it open before she had even consciously decided to do so. What she found inside made her blood run cold. It was a list of names, hundreds of them, accompanied by dates, locations, and brief descriptions of events. As she scrolled through the entries, Maya began to recognize what she was looking at, a record of every person who had discovered the vulnerabilities in the Federation's networks and tried to do something about them. Some of the names were marked as neutralized, others as contained, and a few as pending. And at the very bottom of the list, added just 3 weeks ago, was a new entry. Maya Chen, scholarship student, Outer Districts, New Shanghai. She had been found, not her fraud, not her false identity, but something else entirely. Someone had noticed her potential, her ability to see what others couldn't see, and they had marked her as a threat to be dealt with. Maya didn't know who they were, didn't know what neutralized or contained really meant, but she understood with perfect clarity that her life had just become infinitely more complicated. She closed the file, erased all traces of her access, and walked out of the lab without looking back. She needed to think. She needed to plan. And most of all, she needed to figure out how to survive in a game whose rules she was only beginning to understand. Maya spent 3 sleepless nights after her discovery, her mind racing through possibilities and plans while she pretended to live her normal life during the day. She attended classes, completed assignments, and worked in Professor Vance's lab as if nothing had changed, all while watching for any sign that someone was watching her, that the threat against her was about to become action. She considered running, disappearing into the depths of the Federation's criminal underworld, where even the most powerful interests couldn't easily reach. But running would mean abandoning her grandmother and brother, leaving Zara without explanation, and giving up on everything she had worked for. Running would mean admitting defeat before she even understood what she was fighting against. Instead, Maya decided to dig deeper. If someone considered her a threat, she wanted to know why. If there was a conspiracy using the Federation's network vulnerabilities for unknown purposes, she wanted to understand its scope and goals. And if Professor Vance was somehow involved in all of this, whether as an ally or an enemy, she needed to know where he really stood. She began her investigation carefully, using all the skills she had developed over years of unauthorized network access. She traced the origin of the encrypted file, following digital breadcrumbs through layers of security and misdirection. She researched the names on the list, discovering that many of them were former researchers, journalists, and activists who had died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances over the past 2 decades. She built a map of connections, linking people and events and organizations in ways that no one else had ever attempted. What she found was both terrifying and fascinating. The Federation's communication networks weren't just vulnerable, they were actively compromised. Someone had built hidden pathways into the system's deepest architecture, backdoors that allowed them to monitor, manipulate, and control information flow across the entire human civilization. They could read private messages, alter official records, plant false evidence, and eliminate digital identities with a few keystrokes. They had been doing this for at least 30 years, according to the timestamps on the oldest files Maya could access, and their influence had grown steadily with each passing decade. Maya called them the architects, for lack of a better name. They weren't a government agency or a corporate cabal or any of the typical villains from conspiracy theories. They were something more subtle, a loose network of individuals embedded in every major institution of the Federation, united by a shared belief that human civilization needed to be guided and controlled for its own good. They weren't interested in money or power in any conventional sense. They were interested in stability, in preventing the chaos and conflict that had nearly destroyed humanity during the resource wars of the previous century. In their minds, they were the silent guardians of human progress, the unseen hands that kept the machine running smoothly. But their methods were monstrous. Maya found records of elections that had been manipulated, protests that had been sabotaged, whistleblowers who had been silenced permanently. She found evidence that the architects had orchestrated entire political movements, steering public opinion in directions that served their agenda while crushing any opposition before it could gain momentum. And she found that they were particularly ruthless in dealing with people who could threaten their control of the networks, people with the technical skills to expose their presence or the moral courage to fight against their influence. People like her, the realization hit Maya with the force of a physical blow. She had spent her entire life building the skills that the architects feared most, developing an intuition for networks and systems that rivaled their own. Her acceptance to the academy hadn't been a random error at all. Someone had flagged her as a potential threat years ago, probably when she first started building her backdoors into Federation systems. They had been watching her, studying her, waiting to see what she would become. And when she hacked her way into the academy's admission system, they had let it happen, perhaps even facilitated it, because they wanted her where they could control her. Professor Vance's role in all of this became clearer as Maya dug deeper. He wasn't one of the architects, but he wasn't entirely opposed to them either. He had been recruited decades ago, brought into their circle because of his genius for network architecture, then cast out when he began to question their methods. The academy had been his sanctuary, a place where the architect's influence was weaker because of the institution's fierce independence and the protection of powerful families who didn't appreciate outside interference in their children's education. But even here, he wasn't truly safe. The architects had placed agents among the faculty and staff, watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake that would justify more aggressive action. Maya understood now why Vance had taken her under his wing. He saw in her the same potential that the architects feared, the same ability to navigate systems that others couldn't even see. He was grooming her, preparing her to continue his work if something happened to him, building her skills until she could challenge the architects on their own ground. What she didn't know was whether he had told her the full truth, whether he was using her as a weapon or as a shield, and whether his goals truly aligned with her own survival. She decided to confront him, It was a risk, perhaps a fatal one, but Maya had never been good at waiting for danger to come to her. She preferred to meet it head-on, to force the confrontation on her own terms rather than let others dictate the battlefield. She found Vance in his lab late one evening, alone, working on something he quickly minimized when he heard her approach. His face showed a flicker of surprise, then calculation, then something that might have been respect. Maya didn't waste time with pleasantries. She told him everything she had discovered, watching his expression carefully for any sign of deception. She told him about the file with her name on it, about the architects and their decades-long manipulation of human civilization, about the list of people who had been neutralized or contained for knowing too much. And she told him that she needed to know where he stood, whether he was her ally or her enemy, whether she could trust him with her life. Vance listened without interruption, his gray eyes fixed on her face throughout her recitation. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin in a gesture she had come to recognize as his thinking pose. Then he stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the artificial stars projected onto the dome's inner surface. He told her a story. It was a story about a young man who had grown up in the chaos following the resource wars, who had seen humanity at its worst and its best, who had dedicated his life to building systems that could prevent such devastation from ever happening again. That young man had believed in the architect's mission, had worked willingly for their cause, had helped design some of the very back doors that now threaded through the Federation's networks. But somewhere along the way, he had begun to question whether stability achieved through manipulation was truly stability at all, whether a peace built on lies could ever be lasting, whether the architect's ends could justify their increasingly extreme means. He had tried to change things from within, Vance said, tried to argue for transparency and accountability and respect for the people they were supposedly protecting. But the architects didn't tolerate dissent. They had turned on him, stripped him of his influence, and would have eliminated him entirely if he hadn't had enough dirt on enough powerful people to make that option too risky. He had retreated to the academy, buried himself in teaching and research, and waited for an opportunity to strike back. Maya was that opportunity. Vance said it plainly, without apology or manipulation. She had abilities that he had never seen before, an intuition for systems that went beyond training or experience into something almost supernatural. With the right guidance and resources, she could do what he had never been able to do: expose the architects to the public, tear down the structures of control they had built, and give humanity the chance to choose its own future rather than having one imposed upon it. But doing that would require her to become stronger than she had ever imagined, to develop skills that would make her the most dangerous person in the Federation, to accept that she might not survive the fight she was about to enter. Maya didn't hesitate. She had been fighting for survival her entire life, against poverty and indifference and a system that had been designed to keep people like her down. This was just a bigger version of the same battle, with higher stakes and more powerful enemies. If there was a chance to tear down the invisible walls that had constrained her world, she would take it, regardless of the cost. Their partnership deepened over the following months. Vance became her true teacher, sharing knowledge he had never revealed to any other student, opening doors to resources and information that should have been impossible for a first-year scholarship student to access. He introduced her to others who shared their cause, a small network of researchers, journalists, and activists who had somehow survived the architect's purges and were working in secret to expose the truth. They called themselves the Resistance, which Maya thought was a bit dramatic, but she couldn't deny the courage it took to oppose an enemy that could make you disappear without a trace. Meanwhile, Maya's public life continued as if nothing had changed. She excelled in her classes, rising to the top of her cohort through a combination of native brilliance and desperate hard work. She developed a reputation as a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent who had somehow emerged from the most unlikely of backgrounds. The faculty began to take notice, and soon she had multiple professors competing to mentor her, offering opportunities that would have seemed like fantasy just a year ago. She also made enemies. The paying students, especially those from the most powerful families, didn't appreciate being outshone by a charity case from the outer districts. They spread rumors about her, suggesting that her academic success was the result of cheating or special treatment rather than genuine ability. They excluded her from social events, sabotaged her group projects, and made her life as difficult as possible within the bounds of academy rules. Their leader was a young man named Marcus Aurelius Webb, the son of a senator who had been promised a position in the academy's elite research track, until Maya's arrival had thrown all such calculations into chaos. Marcus was tall and handsome, with the easy confidence of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. He had been groomed for leadership since birth, educated by the best tutors, connected to the most influential networks, and told every day that he was destined for greatness. Maya's existence was an insult to everything he believed about the natural order of things, and he made it his personal mission to put her in her place. Their rivalry came to a head during the Academy's annual innovation competition, a prestigious event where students presented their most ambitious projects to a panel of judges from the Federation's top research institutions. The winner received funding, recognition, and a guaranteed position in any graduate program of their choosing. For most students, it was an opportunity for glory. For Maya, it was a chance to take a crucial step in her war against the architects. Her project, developed in secret with Vance's guidance, was a new type of network security protocol that could detect and neutralize hidden backdoors without disrupting normal communications. On the surface, it was a technical achievement that any panel of judges would recognize as revolutionary. Beneath the surface, it was a weapon that could strip the architects of their primary means of control, forcing them into the open where they could be fought and defeated. Marcus had no idea what Maya's project really represented, but he sensed its importance and was determined to prevent her from winning. He used his family's connections to learn the details of her work, then spent weeks developing a competing project that covered similar ground with a more polished presentation. He also began spreading rumors that Maya had plagiarized her ideas from Professor Vance, hoping to disqualify her before the competition even began. The confrontation came the night before the final presentations. Maya was working late in one of the Academy's public laboratories, putting the finishing touches on her demonstration, when Marcus appeared with three of his closest friends. They didn't bother with pretense or subtlety. Marcus told her plainly that she didn't belong at the Academy, that her presence was an aberration that would soon be corrected, and that if she knew what was good for her, she would withdraw from the competition and return to whatever slum had produced her. Maya had faced bullies before, in the outer districts where the strong preyed on the weak and survival depended on knowing when to fight and when to run. She recognized the threat in Marcus's eyes, the entitled cruelty of someone who had never faced consequences for his actions. She also recognized the opportunity that his arrogance had presented. She told Marcus that she would make him a deal. They would compete fairly in tomorrow's presentation, and whoever lost would publicly acknowledge the other's superiority and withdraw from the research track entirely. If Maya won, Marcus would have to admit in front of the entire Academy that a scholarship student from the outer districts had beaten him. If Marcus won, Maya would leave the Academy and never return. Marcus agreed immediately, too confident in his own abilities and connections to consider that he might lose. His friends served as witnesses, and the deal was sealed with a handshake that Marcus made as painful as possible, grinding Maya's fingers in his grip while smiling his perfect smile. Maya didn't flinch. She had endured worse. The next morning, the Academy's Great Hall was packed with students, faculty, and distinguished guests from across the Federation. The innovation competition was one of the highlights of the academic calendar, a showcase for the institution's best and brightest. The judges' panel included 3 former Academy directors, 2 Nobel laureates, and the current head of the Federation's Advanced Research Agency. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Marcus presented first. His project was impressive, a sophisticated refinement of existing network security techniques that demonstrated deep knowledge and polished execution. He spoke with confidence and charm, answering the judges' questions smoothly, making jokes that earned appreciative laughter from the audience. When he finished, the applause was enthusiastic, and several of the judges nodded in obvious approval. Then it was Maya's turn. She walked to the presentation stage, feeling the weight of every eye in the room, knowing that she was about to attempt something that could save or destroy everything she had worked for. Her project wasn't just technically superior to Marcus's. It was a fundamental breakthrough that could reshape the entire field of network security. But presenting it meant revealing capabilities that could draw the architect's attention, showing the world what she was truly capable of, and trusting that the protection of public scrutiny would be enough to keep her safe. She began to speak. Her voice was steady, her explanations clear, her demonstrations flawless. She walked the judges through the theoretical framework of her protocol, showed them simulations that proved its effectiveness, and answered their increasingly excited questions with a depth of understanding that left no doubt about her expertise. By the time she finished, the audience was silent, processing what they had just witnessed, recognizing that they were in the presence of something extraordinary. The judges deliberated for less than 10 minutes. When they returned, their decision was unanimous. Maya Chen was the winner of the innovation competition, and her project was being recommended for immediate development funding from the Federation's top research agencies. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Maya allowed herself a moment of triumph before the reality of her situation came crashing back. She had won, but in winning, she had also declared herself to the architects in a way that couldn't be ignored or explained away. She had demonstrated capabilities that marked her as an existential threat to their control, and she had done it in front of the most influential audience in the Federation. There would be consequences, and they would come soon. Marcus kept his word, grudgingly acknowledging her victory and withdrawing from the research track as promised. But his eyes, as he made his announcement, promised that he would find other ways to make her pay, other paths to revenge that didn't require him to honor the spirit of their agreement. Maya filed that away as a problem for another day. She had bigger concerns now. The architects made their move 3 weeks later. Maya was walking back to her dormitory after a late night in the library when she noticed 3 men following her, moving with the coordinated precision of professionals. She didn't run. Running would only confirm their suspicions and invite immediate action. Instead, she took a slight detour that led her past a security station where campus guards were always present, then ducked into a service tunnel that she had mapped during her first month at the academy. She emerged on the far side of campus, near Professor Vance's private residence, and found him waiting for her at the door. He had been monitoring her movements through a network of sensors he had placed throughout the academy, and he had seen the men who were tracking her. He pulled her inside, activated a security system that would alert them to any approach, and told her that it was time to make some difficult decisions. The architects had run out of patience. Maya's victory in the innovation competition had forced their hand, demonstrating capabilities that they couldn't allow to develop further. They would try to recruit her first, Vance predicted, offering money, power, and protection in exchange for her loyalty. If she refused, they would move to containment, isolating her from her allies and her resources until she was no longer a threat. And if containment failed, they would resort to neutralization, the final solution that had ended so many promising lives before her. Maya asked what her options were. Vance laid them out methodically. She could accept the architect's offer, join their organization, and hope to change it from within as he had once tried to do. She could flee, using her skills to disappear into the Federation's underworld and live as a fugitive for the rest of her life. Or she could fight, using the network security protocol she had developed to expose the architect's control of the Federation's networks and force them into a battle they couldn't win. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Maya had been fighting her entire life, and she wasn't about to stop now. But she also wasn't stupid enough to think she could defeat the architects alone. She needed allies, resources, and a plan that gave her at least a chance of success. Most of all, she needed time to prepare, and time was the one thing she didn't have. Vance told her about a failsafe he had been building for years, a dead man's switch that could broadcast the truth about the architects to every network in the Federation if something happened to him. The switch was connected to a massive data archive containing decades of evidence, enough to prove every accusation and expose every crime. But the switch required 2 keys to activate, and one of those keys was in the possession of someone who had betrayed him years ago, someone who now worked for the architects themselves. That someone was Elena Vasquez, a former colleague who had been Vance's closest friend, until she decided that the architect's vision of controlled stability was preferable to the chaos of freedom. She had risen high in their organization, becoming one of the few people who knew the full scope of their operations and had access to their most sensitive systems. Getting the key from her would require Maya to infiltrate the architect's innermost circle, a task that seemed impossible for someone who had just declared war against them. But Maya had an idea. It was crazy, dangerous, and would probably get her killed. It was also the only chance she had. She would let the architects recruit her. She would pretend to accept their offer to embrace their vision to become one of them. She would work her way into their trust, find Elena Vasquez, and steal the key that Vance needed. And when she had everything in place, she would burn their entire empire to the ground. Vance listened to her plan with an expression that mixed admiration with concern. He warned her about the dangers of undercover work, about the psychological toll of living a lie within a lie, about the countless ways her deception could be discovered and punished. But he also recognized that her plan was their best chance, perhaps their only chance, and in the end, he agreed to help her make it work. They spent the next week preparing. Vance gave Maya a crash course in the architect's history, culture, and operations, teaching her how they thought, how they communicated, and how they tested the loyalty of new recruits. He helped her construct a cover story that would explain her apparent betrayal, one that painted her as a pragmatic survivor who had finally recognized which way the wind was blowing. And he gave her tools that would help her navigate the treacherous waters ahead, including encryption keys, emergency protocols, and a way to contact him if things went wrong. The architect's offer came exactly as Vance had predicted. A woman in an expensive suit approached Maya in the Academy's central garden, introduced herself as a representative of an organization dedicated to the stability and prosperity of human civilization, and invited her to consider how her talents might be put to better use. The woman was polished, persuasive, and utterly confident in the rightness of her cause. She spoke of the resource wars and the chaos that had followed, of the fragility of human society and the constant threat of collapse, of the necessary sacrifices that wise men and women made to keep the peace. Maya listened, asked the right questions, and pretended to be convinced. She spoke of her difficult childhood, her distrust of institutions that had failed her family, her hunger for something bigger than herself. She said she had always suspected that someone was guiding human progress from behind the scenes, and now that she knew the truth, she wanted to be part of it. The woman smiled, clearly pleased by Maya's response, and promised to be in touch. 3 days later, Maya received an encrypted message containing coordinates for a meeting off campus. She went alone, as instructed, and found herself in a private shuttle that took her to a facility on one of Europa's neighboring moons. There, she was greeted by more serious people who asked more serious questions, probing her motivations, testing her knowledge, and evaluating her potential. She passed every test, said everything they wanted to hear, and was eventually led to a conference room where a familiar face was waiting. Elena Vasquez was beautiful in a cold, precise way, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to dissect everyone they looked at. She studied Maya for a long moment, then smiled and extended her hand in welcome. She said she had heard impressive things about Maya's abilities, that the organization was always looking for talented young people who shared their vision, and that she personally would be overseeing Maya's introduction to their work. Maya shook her hand, smiled back, and began the most dangerous performance of her life. The months that followed tested Maya in ways she had never imagined possible. She lived 2 lives simultaneously, playing the role of the loyal architect recruit while secretly working to bring down everything the organization represented. During the day, she attended academy classes and maintained her position as the institution's rising star. During the night, she traveled to architect facilities across the Federation, learning their methods, earning their trust, and searching for the key that Elena Vasquez possessed. The architects were more sophisticated than Maya had expected. Their organization wasn't the shadowy cabal of popular imagination, meeting in dark rooms to plot world domination. It was a distributed network of professionals who saw themselves as civil servants of the highest order, doing necessary work that the public couldn't understand or appreciate. They had doctors who managed public health crises before they could become pandemics, economists who prevented market crashes through careful manipulation, and security specialists who eliminated threats that could destabilize entire worlds. They believed with absolute sincerity that they were the good guys. Maya's job was to learn their systems, to understand the digital infrastructure that allowed them to monitor and control information flow across the Federation. Her cover story positioned her as a brilliant programmer who could help them upgrade their capabilities, and she played the part perfectly, demonstrating just enough skill to be valuable without revealing the full extent of her abilities. She worked alongside architect technicians, attended training sessions, and gradually built a mental map of their operations that would be essential when the time came to strike. Elena Vasquez became her mentor, her supervisor, and her closest observer. The older woman took a personal interest in Maya's development, spending hours discussing philosophy, politics, and the nature of power. She explained the history of the architects, from their founding in the aftermath of the resource wars to their current status as the invisible government behind all governments. She spoke of the sacrifices they had made, the difficult decisions they had taken, the lives they had ended to preserve the greater good. And she watched Maya constantly, looking for any sign of doubt or deception. Maya gave her none. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions, to lock away her true self behind a mask of compliance and enthusiasm. She laughed at Alina's jokes, nodded at her pronouncements, and expressed gratitude for every opportunity she was given. She became the model recruit, rising quickly through the organization's ranks, earning access to increasingly sensitive operations. And through it all, she kept her eyes open for the one thing she needed, the key to Professor Vance's dead man's switch. Her opportunity came 6 months into her infiltration, during a crisis that threatened to expose the architect's activities to the public. A journalist named Sarah Park had been investigating rumors of government manipulation for years, building a case that came dangerously close to the truth. The architects had tried to discredit her through their usual methods, planting false evidence of fabrication and bias, but Park was too careful and too well connected to be easily dismissed. When she announced that she would be publishing a major exposé in the coming weeks, the organization's leadership decided that more direct action was necessary. Maya was assigned to the team responsible for neutralizing the threat. It was a test, she understood, a way of evaluating her commitment to the cause. She would be expected to participate in actions that crossed every moral line she had ever held, to become complicit in the destruction of an innocent woman who had done nothing wrong except seek the truth. Refusal would mean exposure and death. Acceptance would mean betraying everything she believed in. She spent a sleepless night wrestling with the decision. She thought about her grandmother and brother back in New Shanghai, about Zara and Professor Vance, and all the people who were counting on her to succeed. She thought about the countless victims of the architect's neutralization operations, the brilliant minds and brave souls who had been silenced to preserve an unjust peace. And she thought about Sarah Park, a woman she had never met but who was fighting the same battle she was fighting, using different weapons but pursuing the same goal. In the end, Maya made a decision that changed everything. She didn't refuse the assignment. Instead, she accepted it and then used her position to warn Sarah Park about what was coming. She constructed an anonymous message that couldn't be traced back to her, containing just enough information to let the journalist know she was in danger and how to protect herself. Then she waited to see what would happen. Park disappeared before the architects could reach her, vanishing into a network of safe houses maintained by other journalists who understood the risks of speaking truth to power. The operation failed, and the leadership began an investigation to determine how their target had been tipped off. Maya watched the investigation unfold with outward calm and inward terror, knowing that any small mistake could lead back to her. But her warning to Park had an unexpected consequence. Sarah had been researching the architects for years, accumulating evidence that she couldn't use without putting herself at risk. When she received Maya's message, she recognized it for what it was, a sign that she had an ally on the inside. She reached out through secure channels, establishing contact with Maya through a series of encrypted messages that laid the groundwork for something neither of them had anticipated. Sarah knew about Professor Vance. She had interviewed him years ago, before the architects had silenced him, and she had kept his files in the hope that someday she would be able to finish what he had started. When Maya explained her mission to find Alina Vasquez's key and activate Vance's dead man's switch, Sarah provided crucial intelligence that changed the entire operation. The key wasn't just a code or a device. It was a person. Specifically, it was Alina herself, or rather, a biometric signature encoded in her DNA that served as one half of the authentication required to activate the switch. Vance had designed the system to require the physical presence of two people, himself and Alina, ensuring that the switch could only be activated if both of them chose to act. When Alina had betrayed him, he had been forced to modify the system, but the requirement for her biometric data remained. Maya needed to find a way to extract Alina's biometric signature without her knowledge, then use it to activate the switch before the architects could react. It was an impossibly delicate operation that required perfect timing, flawless execution, and more luck than anyone deserved. But it was also her only path forward, and she began planning immediately. The opportunity came during the architect's annual gathering, a secret conference where the organization's leadership met to discuss strategy and policy for the coming year. The gathering took place on a private station orbiting Neptune, far from any inhabited world, with security measures that would challenge even Maya's abilities. But it also brought together everyone who mattered in the architect hierarchy, including Elena Vasquez, in a single location where Maya could act without interference from the Federation's normal law enforcement. Maya convinced her handlers that she should attend the gathering as Elena's aide, arguing that her technical skills would be useful during the conference's technology presentations. Elena approved the request, pleased by Maya's apparent dedication and eager to showcase her talented protege to the organization's leadership. Neither of them suspected that Maya was planning to bring their entire world crashing down. The station was beautiful in a cold, sterile way, all gleaming metal and perfect lines floating against the backdrop of Neptune's blue-green storms. Maya spent the first 2 days of the conference maintaining her cover, attending meetings, taking notes, and playing the role of the eager young recruit. She mapped the station's layout, identified the security systems, and calculated the timing of guard patrols down to the second. She found the room where the leaders kept their most sensitive data, the server banks where their secrets were stored, and the communication arrays that connected them to the rest of the Federation. On the third night of the conference, Maya made her move. She had slipped a mild sedative into Elena's evening tea, ensuring that her mentor would sleep soundly through what was about to happen. She had disabled the surveillance systems in her sector of the station, creating a blind spot that would last exactly 18 minutes before backup systems activated. And she had prepared a device of her own design, a scanner that could capture biometric data at a distance without requiring physical contact. She entered Elena's quarters silently, moving with the precision of someone who had practiced this moment 1,000 times in her mind. Elena was sleeping peacefully, her face relaxed in a way that Maya had never seen during waking hours. For a moment, Maya felt something like sympathy for the woman who had become her enemy. Elena had made her choices for reasons that seemed valid to her, believing in a vision of order and stability that Maya couldn't share but could at least understand. In another life, they might have been allies instead of adversaries. The scanner worked perfectly, capturing Elena's biometric signature in seconds and transmitting it through a quantum-encrypted channel to Professor Vance's secure server back on Europa. Maya heard a soft chime in her earpiece, confirming that the data had been received and that Vance was ready to activate the dead man's switch. All that remained was to give the signal. But something was wrong. As Maya turned to leave, she found Elena watching her from the bed, her eyes clear and alert, with none of the drowsiness that the sedative should have caused. Elena smiled, and it was the smile of a predator who had been playing with its prey. "Did you really think we didn't know?" Elena asked, rising from the bed with fluid grace. "We've been watching you since the day you arrived at the academy. We knew about Professor Vance, about your little network of rebels, about everything you were planning. We let you get this far because we wanted to understand your methods to see how far you would go, and now we have all the evidence we need." Maya felt her world collapsing around her. All the careful planning, all the risks she had taken, all the sacrifices she had made were now worthless. The architects had been playing her from the beginning, using her own ambitions against her, waiting for the perfect moment to spring their trap. Elena continued speaking, explaining how they had identified Maya as a potential threat years ago, how they had manipulated events to bring her to the academy, how they had watched her every move while pretending to be fooled by her deceptions. They had even allowed her to warn Sarah Park, knowing that it would lead them to a network of journalists and activists they hadn't previously identified. Maya had been their tool without ever knowing it. But Elena made one mistake. In her confidence and triumph, she came too close, close enough for Maya to reach. And Maya, in a moment of desperate courage, did the one thing that no one had anticipated. She grabbed Elena's wrist, activating a secondary function of the scanner that she had built but never mentioned to anyone. The device wasn't just capable of reading biometric data. It could also transmit it directly, using the physical contact to bypass any security measures. In that instant, with Elena's hand in hers, Maya sent the activation signal that Vance had been waiting for. The dead man's switch activated. Across the Federation, on every network and every platform, the truth about the architects began to broadcast. Decades of evidence, carefully documented and irrefutably authenticated, flooded into the public consciousness. The manipulation, the murders, the systematic control of human civilization, all of it was laid bare for everyone to see. There was no way to stop it, no way to spin it, no way to make it disappear. Elena's expression shifted from triumph to horror as she realized what had happened. She released Maya and reached for her communicator, shouting orders to subordinates who were too overwhelmed to respond. The station's systems began to malfunction as the broadcast overloaded their communication arrays, feeding on the very infrastructure the architects had built to control information. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and chaos erupted throughout the facility. Maya ran. She had planned for this moment, mapping escape routes and preparing contingencies for every scenario she could imagine. She navigated the station's corridors with desperate speed, dodging security personnel who were too confused to know who to chase, reaching the hangar bay where emergency shuttles were docked. The architect leadership tried to stop her. They activated lockdowns, sealed bulkheads, and deployed armed guards to every exit. But they were fighting against their own systems, compromised by the broadcast that was still flooding out into the universe. Maya used every trick she had learned, every skill she had developed to stay one step ahead. She hacked through security doors, disabled tracking systems, and finally reached a shuttle that she had sabotaged earlier to ignore remote commands. She launched into space just as the station's main reactor began to overload. Whether from the system failures or from a deliberate self-destruct command, she never learned. The explosion lit up the darkness of Neptune's orbit like a brief new sun, and Maya watched it fade in her shuttle's rear display as she set course for Europa. The journey home took 3 days, the same as her first trip to the Academy so many months ago. But everything had changed. The Federation was in turmoil as the truth about the architects spread. Governments fell, corporations collapsed, and millions of people struggled to understand how thoroughly they had been deceived. There were riots in some worlds, celebrations in others, and everywhere demands for accountability that could not be ignored. Maya found Professor Vance waiting for her at the Academy's transport hub. He looked older than she remembered, worn down by the stress of the past months, but his eyes were bright with vindication and pride. He embraced her without words, holding her tightly for a long moment, then stepped back and smiled. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Maya was hailed as a hero by some, condemned as a terrorist by others, and investigated by every law enforcement agency in the Federation. Her fraud, her hacking, her infiltration of the architects were all exposed and debated and argued over in countless forums. Some called for her imprisonment. Others called for medals and monuments. In the end, the Federation's transitional government chose to pardon her, recognizing that her crimes had been committed in service of a greater good, and that punishing her would only make her a martyr for causes that were already gaining too much momentum. She was offered positions of power and influence, opportunities to shape the new order that was emerging from the ashes of the old. She declined them all. Instead, Maya returned to New Shanghai, to the outer districts where she had grown up, to the grandmother and brother who had never stopped believing in her. She used her technical skills to build the water filtration systems she had dreamed of since childhood, to bring clean water and hope to communities that had been forgotten by the powerful. She worked with Sarah Park and the network of journalists who had helped expose the architects, creating new systems of accountability that would make it harder for any organization to ever again control information flow across the Federation. Zara came with her, leaving the Academy to join Maya's mission. Together, they recruited other talented young people from the forgotten corners of the Federation, building a new kind of organization that was everything the architects had failed to be: transparent, accountable, dedicated to serving the public rather than controlling it. The architects didn't disappear entirely. Many of their members had escaped the collapse, retreating into hiding to plot their return. Elena Vasquez was never found, and rumors persisted that she was rebuilding the organization in secret, waiting for the chaos to pass so she could resume her work. Maya knew that the battle wasn't truly over, that the temptation to control and manipulate would always exist, and that eternal vigilance was the price of freedom. But for now, there was hope. The Federation was stumbling toward a better future, learning to live without the invisible hands that had guided it for so long. People were making their own choices, for better or worse, and that freedom was worth all the chaos and uncertainty that came with it. On the first anniversary of the broadcast, Maya stood on the roof of her grandmother's building, looking out over the outer districts as the sun set over New Shanghai. The air was cleaner than it had been in years, the result of new environmental policies that had emerged from the post-architect reforms. The streets below were busy with people going about their lives, unaware that they were being watched by the girl who had changed everything. Her tablet buzzed with a message from Professor Vance. He had been offered a position as head of a new Federation agency dedicated to network security, one designed to prevent the kind of manipulation the architects had practiced. He wanted Maya to join him, to help build something that would protect the freedom they had fought for. She read the message, thought about it for a long moment, and then typed her response. She would come, she said, but on her own terms. She would help build the new agency, but she wouldn't become part of any power structure. She would remain independent, free to challenge anyone who abused their position, whether they were former architects or newly appointed officials. She had learned too much about the corrupting nature of power to ever trust it completely, even in her own hands. Vance's response came quickly, a single word that carried all the weight of their shared history. Agreed. Maya smiled, powered down her tablet, and went inside to have dinner with her family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new enemies, new battles to fight. But tonight she was home, surrounded by the people she loved, and that was enough. The story of the girl from the outer districts who had brought down the most powerful organization in human history was just beginning. There would be books written about her, documentaries produced. Her name would become a symbol of resistance and hope for generations to come. But Maya herself remained grounded, remembering always the cracked tablet screen and the stolen acceptance letter that had started it all. She had been given a chance by accident, a wrong file sent to the wrong person at the wrong time. What she had done with that chance had been entirely her own choice, shaped by the values her grandmother had taught her and the dreams she had never given up on. In the end, that was the lesson she wanted people to learn from her story, that circumstances might be beyond your control, but your response to them never was. The universe was vast and indifferent, but human beings could still make choices that mattered. Maya Chen had proven that, and she would spend the rest of her life proving it again and again, one choice at a time. The stars above New Shanghai burned with the same light they had always burned with, unchanged by the upheavals happening in the human civilization below. But for the first time in decades, those stars represented possibility rather than limitation, a future that was open to everyone rather than controlled by a chosen few. And somewhere in the cosmos, on a hidden station that no one knew about, Elena Vasquez watched the same stars and began to plan her return. The battle between control and freedom, between manipulation and transparency, between those who believed they knew best and those who trusted the people to decide for themselves, would continue long after Maya and Elena were both gone. It was a battle as old as humanity itself, one that could never be truly won but must always be fought. Maya knew this, accepted it, and found peace in the knowledge that she had done her part. The next generation would have to carry the torch, and she would do everything in her power to make sure they were ready. That was her new mission, her new purpose, and she embraced it with the same fierce determination that had carried her from the recycling plants of the outer districts to the corridors of power in the heart of the Federation. One wrong file had changed her life. One brilliant girl had changed the course of history. And one elite academy had learned that excellence couldn't be measured by birth or wealth, but only by the choices a person made when everything was on the line. The sun set over New Shanghai, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Maya Chen, hero of the Federation, went home to eat dinner with her grandmother.